The Qatar Grand Prix is just like a roller coaster ride, especially for the Red Bull having a driver Sergio Perez. Heist of Max Stappen winning the Drivers' Championship, and then they had Sergio Perez. Did you have a question about whether Sergio Perez is best for Red Bull? And what are the others' viewpoints on the previous races of him? Right? Yes, it has an interesting story behind it. This video will tell you all about Sergio Perez, who serves as a driver for Red Bull. If you are ready to explore with us, make sure to stick to the end of this video. I expect Formula 1 to introduce maximum length LMS next season if the Grand Prix is any indication, since the restriction on how long cars could use a tire created an exciting race. The drivers were pushing hard the entire race, as evidenced by Max's fastest lap, finishing just 0.4 of a second slower than his qualifying time. Lando Norris's comment that George R. Russell had the day's best driver was made at the beginning of his second stint. Even so, Oscar Piastri was also deserving of the victory after causing the majority of Mercedes to collide at the start, and then winning the race with his greatest performance to date. Lewis's race was ended by Russell on lap 1, which dropped George to last place through a few pit stops in front of him. When the racing resumed behind the safety car, he was only 14 of 18 cars, but the Mercedes still had amazing race pace, allowing George to finish in 4th place with just 34 seconds to spare. My teammate knocked me out, but after the race, he apologized and accepted full responsibility for an error that was all his fault. Another shocking performance came from Lance Stroll, who through his steering wheel shoved his performance coach and finished last for the 5th straight race. It was a tough weekend for colleagues all over the grid, but Sergio Perez's check may have been the worst of the lot once more. It's a good thing Lewis Hamilton finished his race, because otherwise, the Drivers' Championship would look much less promising. With 5 races remaining in the season, he is still in 2nd place in the Drivers' Championship, although that position is far from secure. Perez's weekend got off to a bad start when he was eliminated from qualifying in Q2. Perez would find himself off track several times throughout the weekend after his final flying lap on Friday was disallowed due to track limitations infringement. But it was his trip to the gravel during the sprint that had the largest impact when Sergio crashed out of the sprint race. Verstappen was nearly certain to win the driver's title. Max isn't given to hyperbole, and after winning the sprint race, his review was a true reflection of the incredible year the 26-year-old has had. "I've accomplished more than I could have ever imagined," he continued, "so I'm living in the now since it is already far better than I had anticipated." Max's victory in the championship showed how awful the Czech weekend was. He defeated Perez, who was driving the same car, into a distant 2nd place. The Mexican is now 184 points behind Max, but Perez has been out of the competition for a while because he was regularly unable to compete with a Sten in qualifying or a race. Base your remarks. Hauls over the weekend illustrated it brilliantly. Checo earned a point. Max received 33 a couple of weeks ago, and we produced a video headlined "Why Perez is Perfect for Red Bull." We believed it may be time to revoke that claim, but not before we discuss why this particular race ought to have been Red Bull's final pick. Let's hear from the team about Czech weekend because, as I just stated, his excursions off the track weren't limited to the sprint race. After 3 track limits infractions at the Qatar Grand Prix, Perez received a black and white flag and was given a 5-second time penalty for his 4th violation, which he served at his pit stop. He immediately received a second 5-second time penalty for going over the track limits for the 5th time, serving this penalty at his final pit stop. He would then go over the track limits once more in the closing moments, adding this penalty to his race time after failing to take advantage of Lewis Hamilton's retirement to secure his 2nd place Drivers' Championship finish. Christian Horner, the head of the Red Bull squad, was blunt with the reporters after the race. Checo's race was a bit of a stunner. Horner claimed he had a terrible weekend due to the incident from yesterday as well as the 3 penalties he received in the race, which increased his finishing time by 15 seconds. It was a squandered opportunity to truly try and secure that 2nd position, as those trips off the track during the race probably only gained him 1/100 of a second of lap time each time. Suddenly, he's much further up the points, scoring on a day when Lewis didn't score. He did it, but the 15 seconds in penalties he received cost him at least 2 positions on the track. In addition, the 2 stops he made to serve his penalties took much longer than Red Bull would typically do because the team erred on the side of caution and made sure they didn't touch the car for at least 5 seconds without the penalties. With the 5 points dropped, Perez would have at least placed 7th instead of 2nd in the Drivers' Championship. By the end of the season, Christian Horner had gained significant Czech support in contrast to Marco, the other media presence on the Red Bull team helmet, whose racist remarks a few weeks earlier had caused him to withdraw from the spotlight. It appears Red Bull has finally been able to control him after Qatar. Even though he did acknowledge the glaring problem Red Bull has, as you can see, Mercedes has too. Ferrari and McLaren both have a pair of drivers who are quite close to one another. Given that Perez has a contract through 2024 and the Mexican is working with a psychological coach, Horner inquired if the Mexican was concerned about continuing a driver mismatch into the following season. Horner noted that the dissatisfaction comes from the fact that we are aware of Checo's past performance. Of course, both last year and this year, he made a substantial contribution to the Constructors' title. As a team, we need him to find that form because we cannot afford to have a significant split. Because both drivers must perform at the top of their game, Carr's departure from Red Bull may have been the deciding factor. Despite Red Bull's complete dominance of both competitions this season, the gap between them and the other teams has begun to close as the checkered flag was raised on one of the most difficult races of many of these drivers' careers. At one point, Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri were separated by only 4.8 seconds. Max's race engineer had to convince Oscar to move forward since they believed McLaren might pose a threat in the race's closing laps. Something like that hasn't occurred this season. Since Miami, Max has coasted to victory in all but one race, and I do mean coast. However, in Qatar, McLaren demonstrated that they are in no position to compete with Red Bull. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris demonstrated at the sand-covered L track that they are not that far off in terms of race pace either, proving that it's not just McLaren who are concerned about Red Bull qualifying. Though George Russell ran on soft tires for the final few laps, he was unable to close the gap to Lando Norris. Even though Mercedes had a lot of speed and McLaren was truly concerned about him, Mercedes could have been able to challenge if Lewis Hamilton hadn't made that move at the beginning of the race that prompted Toto Wolff to do his trademark headphone-smashing maneuver. For those 4 races, Red Bull will want to take advantage of the commercial advantages that Czech brings, but after that, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if he finds himself without a race seat in 2024. So, what are your thoughts on the Checo race being the last straw for him? Which of these would you love to have in 2023? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We will catch you in the next video.